Finally, 10.0 is the behavior analyst's ethical responsibility to the BACB. Behavior analysts, RBTs, must adhere to this code and all rules and standards of the BACB. 10.01 Truthful and accurate information provided to the BACB. Behavior analysts, wherever is applying, only provide truthful and accurate information. So don't lie, right? Don't lie about anything on the application. And if you accidentally do, correct it. Seek out correction immediately. 10.02 refers to timely responding, reporting, and updating of information provided to the board. Okay, so let's say as an RBT, you are found to be, you do something that's in violation of this code, and you go through a disciplinary hearing at the organization that you work for. Again, I'm kind of throwing this out there. This very, very rarely happens. Okay, but let's say you do that. Let's say that you go through, you find it, and it's resolved. You do have 30 days to let the board know about this, to let the board know that you went through this. It's basically one of the board's deadlines, is that if you do have some sort of sanction against you that the company found, and you violated the code, and you went through that, again, some sort of investigation, it is your responsibility to inform the board that you did this, that this happened. Okay? You would email the board and let them know. This also happens with any public health and safety related fines or tickets where the behavior analyst is named on the ticket. So if I get a speeding ticket, I have to, and my name is on the speeding ticket, I have to report it to the board. Okay. And likewise, if I go to get a physical and there's a mental condition that would impair my ability to competently practice, I have to inform the board. Or if I change my name, address, or email contact, I need to inform the board. Basically, if anything that could change, or anything like happens where I'm named on it, or if like a ticket, for example, or if I change my name, my address, or move or something, I need to inform the board, within that 30 days of it occurring that happened. Or I could, I could essentially have sanctions imposed on me from the board. The point being, though, is that you want to report everything that could affect your practice. Like I said, if you're an RBT and you get a speeding ticket and you're named on that speeding ticket, even though it seems minor, you need to make sure to report to the board that you received a speeding ticket. We had a situation like this come up where a person had previously been found guilty of something. They did not disclose that to us, nor disclose it to any organization. And when it came to light, we had to let that person go because they hadn't informed us and it wasn't documented. Again, this is a form of documentation, really. But you do have 30 days to report that to the board. (10.03) Confidentiality in the BACB intellectual property. A behavior analyst not infringe on any of the BACB's intellectual property, such as logo. And this is all stuff like you just don't want to steal their stuff, right? Don't want to take any of their stuff. It is copyrighted by the BACB. Okay, we don't want to infringe on their intellectual property rights. This has to do with just don't steal their questions. Their questions from their question banks are all copyrighted. This is why when you take an exam with them, they'll tell you do not share the questions. Don't share any of the stuff that may, that you got like from question banks or anything. that was from the BACB. And again, this is one of the reasons why during this whole RBT thing, we are saying that this is independent of the BACB, because these are questions that weren't developed by them. These are questions developed by the person providing the RBT training. Essentially, and if you do know that there's some infringements going on or unauthorized access, make sure to report that. The point being, though, is that all the BACB, they copyright the examination questions, and you cannot share those. .04 is kind of similar in the sense that you're not to, take part in any kind of thing that using exam questions that were from the BACB. Essentially, all this can be boiled down to the BACB, the questions on the test and stuff like that are their property. And any unauthorized, they're not going to offer, free, question banks to you. So any kind of unauthorized use of that is essentially bad, right? And so they can actually withdraw your exam if they find out that you used question banks that were essentially dumped onto the internet from some source, stolen essentially. .05 is compliance with BACB supervision and coursework standards. Behavior analysts ensure that coursework, including continuing education events, supervised experience, RBT training and assessment, and BCABA supervision, basically are conducted in accordance with the BACB standards if these activities are intended to comply with those. Basically what it's saying here is that as a behavior analyst and as the RBT, it is your responsibility to make sure that supervision is occurring in a way that complies with the standards. Okay, so as an RBT, you need to seek out supervision, for example. We talked about that earlier in this RBT training. You seek out supervision to make sure that it's occurring according to the standards of the BACB. .07 is discouraging misrepresentation by non-certified individuals. Behavior analysts report non-certified and, if applicable, non-registered practitioners to the appropriate state licensing board and to the BACB if the practitioners are misrepresenting the BACB certification or registration status. Basically, it's saying be accurate and as honest about what you actually are. For example, if you're not registered yet, if you're not an RBT yet, don't say you're an RBT, say you're a behavior therapist. There was one time when I was doing some consultation for a school before I was certified, and they, in an IEP, told the principal that I was a behavior analyst, a BCBA, and so I had to correct them right then and there that I was not, okay, because that was misrepresentation of myself. Okay, I wasn't the one who said it, I'm saying, but I had to correct the other person because I did not want to be misrepresented. Being familiar with these guidelines. RBTs, as well as BCBAs, BCABAs, whoever is registered from the board, have an obligation to be familiar with these guidelines set by the BACB, other ethics codes, and their application to registered behavior technician work. So, I don't want you to just think this is something to kind of like, okay, I do, I try to be as accurate as possible, I don't have sex with my clients, etc., etc. This is not, it's something you should be familiar with, okay, because unfortunately, well, I shouldn't even say that. It's not really unfortunate, but ignorance is not an excuse. Okay, ignorance of these ethics codes will not be an excuse if you do violate them. So, there's been several times I was violating an ethics code and I didn't even know it because I wasn't as familiar as I should have been. So I can stride this enough to you guys: is you should be familiar with these guidelines. Okay, go print it out. It's like 10 pages long, I think, or something like that. The RBT ethics, it's not that long. Or not the RBT ethics, the BACB ethics. And print it out, be familiar with it, highlight the important parts. Okay, because again, you're not only representing yourself, you're representing the field. And it's good professional behavior to be familiar with the guidelines of whatever company or whatever organization you're working with. Because again, a lot of good professional organizations, whether they're behavior analytic or not in nature, are going to have some sort of ethics code, some sort of rule book to play by. And it's not again an excuse if you don't know the rule. It's your job to be familiar with it. It's your obligation, and that goes not just for RBTs, but like if you're in any other professional organization. I can always wonder if Tom Brady, in the NFL, knew that he wasn't supposed to deflate those footballs, right? His ignorance of that is no excuse. It's not an excuse. It was if he's found to break a rule, he broke a rule. So again, RBTs have an obligation to be familiar with these guidelines set by the BACB. So besides the RBT ethics code, what else are we required to do? We protect and maintain client dignity, protect and maintain the patient's rights, and we uphold a therapeutic environment. Maintaining client dignity. So how do we know if we're maintaining client dignity? Do I give and honor choices? Do I provide adequate space for privacy? Do I look behind or beyond the person's disability and treat the person with respect? Because remember, these are the individual you're working with. Even though they may have some sort of disability, they're still a person first. And do I empower the patient to be independent and to grow to his or her fullest potential? If you can answer yes to all these questions, chances are you're giving and maintaining dignity towards that client. Patient's rights. Various rights must be observed and protected. The right to make choices, the right to privacy, the right to a therapeutic environment, and the right to refuse treatment if they don't want it. Now, this doesn't mean that if a child is screaming and yelling at you because you're trying to ask a question, that they don't want the treatment, right? Because at that point, it would be up to the parents. But if I'm working with a 21-year-old and they don't want to do ABA therapy anymore because they feel like it's not working for them, they have that right to refuse that treatment. Likewise, I always tell parents I work with that they have a right to, refuse the service. But I do always document it, of course. Document, right, guys? But I do tell them about that right, because I have to be upfront about it. Okay, the right of choices. To give frequent choices and honor them. Okay. When providing choices, you should have all the alternatives possible that are available. So if I say, do you want an apple or an orange? You need to have an apple or orange available. Okay. So again, I don't want to, make this seem, more difficult than it is. If you're providing a choice, make sure to have the choices, all the choices you're providing available. So I always think back to that Simpsons episode. I think it was an elephant or something where the Bart Simpson won like something that he could either pick $1,000 or $10,000 or a pet elephant. And when he picked the pet elephant, he wanted the elephant. The radio, show was very surprised because everyone had always taken the money, and so, but I can't remember the whole gist of the storyline, but the point was they basically had to go through some hoops and eventually got the pet elephant. But the point was that it was not available right then. So the point being though is if you're going to offer choices, make sure to have the choices available. And make sure they can also use those choices too. So if I told the person, for example, that you want to, open this jar of candy, they should know how to open the jar, right? Point being though is that individuals have the right of choices, and you should give frequent choices and honor them in an accurate way. The right of privacy. The patient's privacy will always be maintained. All information, again, is top secret, right? It's confidential and it should not be made public. Personal privacy should be respected. The patients have the right to a therapeutic treatment environment. These are based on the research literature and adapted to the individual client. So what is a therapeutic environment? The environment is engaging. Okay. The environment is engaging means the reinforcement is readily available, problem behaviors are reduced, reinforcement contingencies are effective, exploratory play and practice is occurring. Basically, we're providing an enriched environment, okay, where reinforcement is available for good behavior, problem behaviors are planned to be ignored or addressed in whatever strategy we're using. The reinforcement contingencies we're setting up are going to be effective, and that we basically encourage play and we practice this in multiple opportunities. So how can we tell if the discussion or if the environment is engaging? The reinforcement is readily available, and the environment is by definition humane. So if the environment is good, the reinforcement is readily available, okay, we're probably providing some sort of engaged environment. Functional skills are taught and maintained. Environments are not judged by paperwork or records, but by observed evidence of training and progress. Incidental teaching allows the natural environment to support skill acquisition and maintenance. Okay? Basically what we're saying here is that the data shows that the skills are actually occurring. Okay? And when we go observe that, we can see that. Okay? So there's been several times when someone presents data to me that says, hey, if this person's learning a lot, they can ask for this now, but until I actually see it, and I can actually see the evidence of it, I can't really say that that's occurring. So I want to be able to make sure and go and do that. Go and actually see that it's occurring. Basically, what we're saying here is that the functional skills, whatever we're teaching that person, are taught and maintained in a therapeutic environment. So defining a therapeutic treatment environment, 3, behavior problems are ameliorated. It's a fancy word, right? Ameliorated means to make something bad better or less painful. This is according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary. We're going to take a purely functional approach regarding both behaviors and procedures that leads to effective interventions. We're going to take away the arbitrary labels based on topographies. Remember, topography is just what a behavior looks like. And replace it with individualized definitions based on function. So I'm not going to say Billy is hitting someone. I'm going to say Billy is engaged in behavior that gains access to attention. Okay? Again, I want to be very clear with this. We're not going to just label behavior. We're going to say what the function is for that person. This will help us to reduce problem behaviors and take a more purely functional approach. The environment is the least restrictive alternative. Again, this will be functionally defined based on the freedom of movement and activity that are engaged in by that person. Community settings, for example, may actually be more restrictive than an institutional one, depending on their behavioral effects. Okay, so what does that actually mean? Basically, it means, let's say a person is out in the community. Yes, a community would be least restrictive. It would be less restrictive for that person, right, in a general term, because they're not having to sit down in a room to do the work. But what if, when they're out in that environment, when they're out in the open environment, they run away. They tend to run away, and get lost. They elope or whatever. Well, because of that behavioral effect of being out in the open, that's actually creating a more restricted learning environment for them, in the open, because when they're eloping, not only is that a safety hazard, but they're losing a lot of opportunities to learn. And they're losing a lot of opportunities to engage in appropriate behaviors. So the actual least restrictive environment in that situation might be more like a room, like a inside of a building, even though in a general sense it's more restrictive, right? They can't freely move about. The point being, though, is it's better for that person because they are able to learn more and to engage in less problematic behavior. So again, one of the ways I like to say it is that the environment is the least restrictive alternative that allows for the most progress. So again, this can get I don't want to get this too complicated. When we're defining a therapeutic environment, we want to make sure that it's the least restrictive available, that is still going to be able to allow the person, a lot of progress. The environment is stable. Okay, we want things to become routine for this person. Changes in schedules, programs, peers, caregivers, etc. are going to be minimized. We want to be predictable. Skills are maintained through consistency and predictability. We want routine to be good. Again, we're working with individuals with autism who strive and work best in a routine. So we want our therapeutic environment to be stable. Finally, the environment is safe. Okay, we want to make sure the environment that we're working in is as safe as possible. This means, sometimes I've had to ask parents to put, kitchen knives away, or, to essentially, move things so that way, because if we're going to be moving around, the person has the potential to, bunk their head into things and stuff like that. Like I said earlier, if I notice maybe like the parents own a gun and the gun is out, or the gun safe's open, I may ask them to close it, just because we want to make sure that the environment is going to be as safe as possible. Okay, I'm also not going to work out where there might be cars going. I might be working out on the road, where the person could run, especially if the person's like a runner, likes to elope, likes to escape. Basically, whatever environment I'm working in, I want it to be as safe as possible. And finally, the patients always have a right to refuse treatment. For children under 18 without capacity to consent, parents may give consent or withdraw or refuse treatment, instead of the patient. And treatment can be refused at any time without penalty. Now, as a behavior analyst, I always will go over the potential benefits, of continuing the treatment, because sometimes parents will just, want to refuse the treatment because it's essentially interfering with something in their life. And that's fine. It's always their right to refuse treatment is what I tell them. But I also want to make sure as a behavior analyst, I tell them the benefits of continuing treatment and some of the effects of maybe taking the treatment away. So again, I'm documenting everything. I want to make sure everything's documented, because an insurance agency will come to me and ask me, okay, why aren't we using these hours? You asked for these hours, why aren't you using them? So again, parents always have the right to refuse treatment. And finally, remember that you are in a professional environment. Remember that whenever you are with a patient or at a clinic, it is a professional environment. We're going to use professional language. Okay, we're not going to be cussing. We're not going to be using bad words, foul language. Again, I'm not the morality police or anything. But again, we're in a professional environment. Okay, and we want to make sure that we're using professional language. And this goes along with refraining from gossiping. Okay, again, I'm telling you that, all this stuff, I'm not trying to be like the police on this, but this is a professional environment. We need to refrain from doing this stuff inside this environment. We need to refrain from negativity. Okay, if you have company complaints about something, complaining loudly about them in front of everyone is not the way to address it. We should be engaged in work activities or in a prescribed break room or something if we're going to be there at the office. The office in the professional environment is not a hangout place. And we're going to address appropriately. Remember, again, it's a professional environment. A lot of this professional environment ideas and a lot of what it is are going to be gone over in your orientation for the actual company. But I just want to add them on here to this ethical part because it is your ethical responsibility to maintain the standards of the organization. And those, almost every organization you're going to work for has some sort of professional environment rules, such as dress codes and how you should be acting at the office. And so it is your ethical responsibility to follow these.